Good morning, everyone. So the mic is on, right? Yep. Good morning. Nice to have you here today. My name is Brenda Hazard. I'm the library director here at Hudson Valley Community College, and I'm delighted to see all of you in our audience today. We have an exciting an exciting speaker today, and I think that our topic this morning is very timely, and I'm so happy that you're all here to learn more about fake news. Welcome to Voices, a library lecture series. We'd like to begin with an acknowledgement that we are gathered on the sacred homelands of the Mahicanic or Mohican people, who are the stewards of this land. Today, the community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors, past and present. Voices presents speakers on timely and enduring issues each semester to broaden and enrich the scope of studies at Hudson Valley Community College. Please fill out and return the surveys you received when you came in. Committee members will be at the back of the auditorium or at the table right outside our doors at the end of the lecture, and your comments are considered very carefully by our committee as we attempt to bring in speakers to address topics that our audience members have identified as particular interest. I also wanted to share with you that this particular academic year, the library is celebrating its 50th year in its current building, the Marvin Library Learning Commons. And today's topic is especially of interest to libraries. It's about fake news, about content, about interpreting content, about providing open access to information from our government and other sources. I wanted to just share with you this morning 3 articles from the American Library Association's Library Bill of Rights. And I thought these 3 brief articles really resonated with today's topic. The first one is, libraries should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historic issues. Library materials should not be prescribed or removed because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval. The second article to share with you, libraries should challenge censorship in the fulfillment of their responsibility to provide information and enlightenment. And the third, libraries should cooperate with all persons and groups concerned with resisting abridgment of free expression and free access to ideas. Please, those are some of the concepts that motivate us in the library and led us to this particular topic this morning. Next, I want to introduce you to our introducer. A lot of talking this morning. I want to introduce to you Kevin Waltz. Kevin is the editor-in-chief of the Hudsonian. The college's wonderful newspaper. It's weekly. It's available in the library for you to view. We actually hold all issues back to the 1950s when it was first published. Come in and see us sometime if you're interested in those archives. Kevin is a criminal justice major in his senior year. He plans on transferring to UAlbany after this year and to enter the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity, that wonderful new facility that's under construction. He's debating possibly continuing on to law school after UAlbany. A great aspiration. He's very proud to serve as editor-in-chief of the Hudsonian. Last semester, the Hudsonian placed 3rd in the nation in the best 2-year school paper category at the College Media Association convention. That's a wonderful accomplishment, and let's give a hand to the Hudsonian. Hudsonian staff will be going to this semester's competition in Washington, D.C. next week, and they hope to place even higher representing the college in that competition. Kevin?
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Good. Okay. Thank you. It's an honor to be asked to introduce Mark. So today we are honored to present Mark Mahoney. Mark is the editorial page editor for the Daily Gazette, a position that he's held since March of 2014. For over 34 years, Mark has worked in the media as a reporter and editor, and for a period of time was the Associate Director of Media Services and Public Affairs for the New York State Bar Association. In 2009, Mark was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing for a series of editorials about the lack of transparency in local government while he was an editor for the Post-Star in Glens Falls, New York. Through his extensive coverage of local politics, legal issues, government transparency, and other matters, Mark has displayed a sense of civic duty that makes him a role model for student journalists such as myself and everyone else at the Hudsonian, the official student newspaper of Hudson Valley Community College. Today, Mark has come to speak to us about the growing trend of fake news in recent years. Mark will be sharing his knowledge and giving advice on how to identify the misinformation that we often find clouding our perception of politics and our ability to make informed decisions, as well as our ability to interpret the news. His extensive experience working in the media and his passion for civics make him an expert on the subject. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Mark Mahoney.
Okay, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your interest in this topic. Today we're going to talk about fake news and government transparency, and then we're going to talk about how they're linked together. So, the other day, the publisher and I were talking to our city reporter, and the publisher was telling the reporter, Pete, just want to know, the mayor loves the work you're doing. He goes, you're doing a great job presenting the facts, getting everything together. Your reporting is solid. The mayor really is just liking what you're doing. And then he says, and I'm standing next to him, he says, not so much this guy. And I said, good. You don't want, as an editorial writer, opinion writer, you don't want the politicians getting too comfortable with your work. But it was also good because it highlighted the fact that the mayor understood the difference between the news reporting and the opinion reporting. And I think that's where some of the lack of clarity comes when you're getting into the fake news. My job is to write opinions. It's to interpret the news and then make a judgment as to what I think based on on the facts that I have, and then guide the public into what I think about those actions, what the newspaper thinks about those actions, and give them some perspective on the straight news reporting. The fact that the mayor is able to make a distinction between the straight news and the opinion news it's commending to him, and we wish all politicians had felt that way. A lot of them do, but a lot of them misinterpret it, and kind of that's where you get into this whole fake news argument. The problem with fake news, or this whole thing, I don't know where the term came from. I can suspect. We certainly know who made it popular. But that there's a lot of danger in that to the democracy, I think, labeling anything fake news. It undermines credibility of legitimate news sources, which makes people doubt the information they're getting, and allows government officials to fend off criticism without presenting facts in return. If they can label anything fake news, then they don't want to hear what their actual facts are. They're just, okay, whatever they say is wrong, even if it's not wrong, even if it is based in fact, even if the information that is being provided to the public is accurate. It undermines that, and then it allows them to continue to do things that maybe are against the public because they don't trust the sources that are telling them, the government watchdogs like the newspaper and media and watch groups, the citizens groups. So rather than tell you what fake news is, I'll tell you what it's not. Fake news, criticism is not fake news. The role of the media in American society is as a watchdog for the government. And our job is to criticize. Our job is to find things wrong and point them out to the public so that those things can be corrected. Certainly we promote the good things government does, but our main role is to just watch out and make sure they're not doing anything that's hurting us. So when somebody gets criticized, they automatically go to that's fake news. Legitimate criticism based on facts based on reporting is not fake news. Another thing that's not fake news is critical reporting. Again, kind of along the same lines. Anything that uncovers malfeasance, a lot of people say, well, you know what, that's fake news. That person, you know, that they looked at my tax returns, or they looked at some of the actions, some of the emails that I exchanged, or some of the things I've done, and they pointed it out. So that's fake news. It's not fake news. Critical reporting is vital to society and to keeping government honest. As I was coming down here, I only had 2 when I started, and as I was driving down here, I live in Queensbury, and I came up with like 10 of what's not fake news. So I'll just give you a couple more. Mistakes aren't fake news. Reporting is difficult, and maybe I'll whine about how difficult it is later. But it's challenging getting facts, getting them on deadline, interviewing people, getting people to say what needs to be said, answer your questions. It's challenging. Data is difficult to interpret sometimes. Sometimes there's just a lot of it. And people are trying to turn it around, especially these days. Not only do they have to turn it around for the next day's paper, a lot of times they have to turn it around for the next Twitter feed. So everybody's rushing. So there's added pressure on the media. Mistakes will be made. Mistakes have always been made. And the thing that especially about newspapers, and I'm sure the other media, is that we always felt it was part of our credibility to correct those mistakes immediately and to admit them, correct them, and try not to make them again. I pretty much remember every correction that I've ever had to publish in a paper, because if I had to admit make a mistake to 25,000 people or 50,000 people or whoever's online, it's humiliating. You're kicking yourself. A lot of times you knew it and you didn't go back and double check that fact. I usually get in trouble when I'm trying to make math connections to the news, because everyone knows journalists don't do math. And you look back and you go, damn, why didn't I double check that? It's a mistake. And sometimes mistakes are harmful to the subjects of your stories. You don't want them to happen. Nobody hates making a mistake more than the writer. We don't blame the editors for not catching it. It's us. It's on us, And as an editorial writer, I'll make them once in a while, very rarely, hopefully. But boy, when I do, I just eat it up. It's just horrible. And but what people will do is they'll automatically say, okay, you made that mistake. You went after me. You did that on purpose. That's fake news. It's not. It happens. I saw I think it was an MSNBC anchor recently did some reporting, and he just said something that was just wrong. And of course, the administration came down on him because it was critical of the administration. I can't remember what it was exactly. But he went on the air, and that night when that error was discovered, and he sat there in front of however many people are his audience, thousands, millions, and he said, I made a mistake. This was wrong. I rushed. I did it wrong. I apologize. Next day, he was like off the air. I don't know if he's permanently off the air, but boy, that's a hit you take. But you come forth and admit it. And when it's even tougher these days, because now before, if you made a mistake, somebody would criticize you for being sloppy or whatever. Now you'd be accused of slanting the news. So it's actually kind of made us a little bit more vigilant, if that was even possible, to really just go over it one more time to make sure we don't make a mistake, because you get accused of being fake news when it's really not your intention. Interviewing people who are critical for your stories or online is not fake news. People have things to say. You want to hear points of view. It's not fake news if you bring those people on to criticize government officials, as long as you identify them and present them as who they are, what their background is, or what their angle might be. It's not fake news to have people who are critical. It's also not fake news to have anonymous sources. The last one. Especially in Washington media, if you see them, that's how they kind of operate. They'll get a legitimate public official, but that public official doesn't want to go on the record because he's afraid of retribution or whatever. But sometimes anonymous sources are vital to the stories. You have to trust that the news organization is going to get a legitimate source, and if they say it's a source close to the president or a source close to the Secretary of State or whatever, depending on the news source, you trust that's who they got, and they didn't just get some guy off the street to say something off the top of his head. So Anonymous sources doesn't necessarily guarantee that something is fake news. It doesn't mean it's not, but it doesn't necessarily a requirement. So how do you determine what's real and what's fake news? I think the most important thing to do is you look at the credibility of the source. You look at professional reporting. You look for credentials. You look for experience. You look for facts that you can check and double check. If people are presenting information, it's easy to check a lot of times whether it's correct or not. Whether a lot of people make stuff up out of whole cloth. They'll manipulate figures. They'll add two figures together that shouldn't be added together. You can check that. I mean, there's a whole new business these days of fact-checking statements. Even, like during the political debates, you can go on Twitter or go on one of the other websites, and you can, if Pete Buttigieg says something, somebody will be fact-checking in real time. So you can be sitting on your phone, which is what I do. I watch debates one eye with the phone and one eye on the TV, and see if he's lying or not, or if he's exaggerating. Not just him, but everybody. And it works for all that. So there's a whole new industry of fact checking, and you can do it in real time. So that's one way to know that you're not dealing with fake news, is to check the facts, or read up on people who are checking the facts and make sure that what they're saying. The other thing that you can sort of more rely on, I would say, and this kind of goes back, is established news sources. Local newspapers, daily newspapers, I think are more credible than a lot of sources. They're trained journalists. As I said earlier, journalism is difficult, and it requires training. Writing is difficult. Conveying information is difficult. It's not the most difficult thing in the world, but it is a challenge. It requires knowledge. It requires a certain amount of skills. So the people who have those skills, look at them and evaluate how they've presented news in the past, and look at their credentials and see how they do it. And that's one good way to find out, or at least help you determine whether a source is credible. Newspaper-based blogs, Capital Connection, Times Union does, is run by Brendan Lyons, who's a friend of mine. He was a reporter in Glens Falls when he first started out, and he was always amazing, and got even more amazing. So if you're going to look for a blog on what's going on at the state capitol or what's going on in the Albany area, I would look at that one, and trust that the information that he's putting out there is pretty close to accurate. So he has a reputation in the community. He knows what he's doing. He has experience. He's covered this stuff before. So if somebody's going to lob a fake news accusation at him, they better be able to back it up, because it'll be a challenge. There was a time when the internet kind of started ramping up. Most of you guys probably remember when it, don't remember when it wasn't ramped up. But when bloggers were going to take over the world, every community was going to have a blogger, and they were going to report. And you wouldn't need news reporters. You wouldn't have to trust these newspapers anymore, the big behemoths in the community. But I think the bloggers quickly found out, a lot of them found out that news not only requires skill, but it also requires time and resources and money. And it's a challenge to put out good, accurate information to the public. And so you don't see that so much. But there are credible blogs out there. Again, check out their credentials and what they say, and what kind of critiques they've gotten. Let's see. Another way you can look for fake news or to spot it is look for the sources themselves. Credible sources on the record, as I said, credible reports from objective sources. So if they're quoting some off-the-wall thing about climate change, double check that. But if they're checking, say something like on disease control or something, you want to check with a government source. Look at a government report. Look at a peer-reviewed report from a university, and that information. And a lot of peer-reviewed reports, and I'll look at them occasionally too, for whatever, if I'm writing about something, and you'll see what methods they used, what sources they used, how they went about getting their information, who they talked to, how many people they polled for whatever data they got out of it, whatever statistics they used. It's a really good way to verify for yourself in your head if that information that the reporter might be quoting in the story, if he's quoting that source, then you can go check. You can check the source yourself to see if it's credible or not. So the good reporters will use credible sources like that. They'll cite legitimate peer-reviewed reports. Government reports are good, like the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention puts out, reports on health statistics, and anything from traffic fatalities to whatever, people who die from pneumonia or something. If that might not be something that you would check as fake news, but if you're worried about, say, vaccination success, the value of vaccinations or something like that, you want to go to a credible source, and maybe not just take some fringe organization that's throwing out information that might not be true. So that's a good way. And if you're going to look for nonprofit groups, there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of government watchdog groups, a lot of good ones here in New York. Just check to see what maybe who their backing is, who their funding is from. Make sure they're nonprofit and not aligned with a political party. Sometimes they can hide it, but it's good to watch those government watchdogs groups, because they're kind of doing what we're doing in the media, is just trying to make sure, keep the government honest, but make sure that they're not trying to spin something to an advantage other than just to look out for government malfeasance. And again, look at their reputations. What do people say about them? Have they been discredited in the past? Another thing, look how they separate fact from opinion. And this is where I started out saying this is like, this is where it gets a little dicey, and this is where the line blurs. And this is where there's an opportunity to challenge something as being real or fake news. In our paper, in most newspapers, the opinion section is completely separate from the news section. My page says opinion in letters about this big. And all the members of our editorial board who are responsible for the editorials, I write them all, but these people are contribute to the information that I put out there. Their names are at the top of this thing, and it includes our publisher. Look for separation. Letters to the editor. If something is on the opinion page, it's an opinion. It may be a very strong factual opinion, I hope it is, but it is just an opinion. The rest of the paper, that's news. Anything that doesn't say opinion on top of it, editorial, letter to the editor, commentary, anything like that, then you look at that for the factual content. But look for organizations that separate it. TV stations, the problem is with cable news, it's really hard to tell. When I was a kid growing up down in the Poughkeepsie area, there was a station, WPIX TV, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, and they would do the news, just a regular TV news, and then at the end they'd have a guy come on and he would read an editorial. And he would say, this is what we think about the news. This is why New York City needs to do this or whatever. And he would have this kind of booming voice. And I just remember, even as a kid, he goes, what's your opinion? We'd like to know. And it was great. It was just stuck in my head. And they separated it. You knew when you even watched a local TV news program that was different from everything else that they were reporting that day. It was just the way newspapers do it. It might have even gotten the format from newspapers, It's like, well, newspapers have an opinion section. After the weather and sports and all that stuff, we're going to do our opinion. And it'll be very clear to the readers or the viewers that that's what that is. With cable news, you don't know sometimes, and even I have trouble telling the difference between their news reporters and their, whether they're commentating or whether they're just reciting facts. So it's more of a challenge to do that. So again, then you have to kind of go back and check who their sources are and what their aim is. It's a little bit difficult these days. And also, like I said, they when they go on social media and stuff, you're not sure. You just have to be alert. Let's see. All right, now I want to switch a little bit. Now, before I wish when I started I said this, but you guys, please, if you have any questions at all, interrupt me, raise your hand, ask me. If there's a part of this that you want me to go into that I'm not going into, you guys were here because you wanted to learn something. And if I'm up here talking about something not interested in or whatever, then ask me what you are interested in, and I'll try and help you through. Yes, ma'am.
Why is there full news? Is it because they do it deliberately, or it's just because they didn't know?
Why is there what news? Oh, why do they do it?
Why
Yeah,
do
it's, people have, they want to,
Because they didn't know any better.
I think it's more because they want to deliberately push a particular point of view, and I really think, you're fooling people. Like, you're deliberately out there to fool people or manipulate people or to, spin something a certain way so that they think a certain way. And to me, it's corrosive, and, you wish that people didn't have those agendas, but they do. And with social media and all the TV and everything that they have available to them, they have more opportunities than ever to get that information out there. So that's why you kind of got to check yourself as much as you can, or just learn to trust certain news sources and trust that they're getting it right. Transparency, anything else on fake news? You have any other questions about it? Yes?
Relating a little back to your whole at the start of it isn't a criticism. This is a little bit tricky, but we were just saying how a really respected, put together news outlet or paper will separate the two.
Mhm.
But criticism is notorious because it taps into your feelings. I mean,
Mhm.
if I read even a few paragraphs, it picks apart something I did last year. Feelings start to bubble up. So my real question is, where would you put in like definitions the difference between criticism and what your job is in editorial? Or if criticism tends towards slanting news, how would you go into what is the user, the end person, us picking up the paper or watching our Twitter? Or how do we know this wasn't just criticism? This was someone like you with credentials stating an editorial. And I know you're right, put in letters, big letters, but what if that isn't there? And also, many people are rushed and don't notice. So what are ways to make a distinction between opinion and someone being criticized, which might get the person being criticized to finger point? That was just their opinion. That's fake. That's not me,
I think you almost got to look at the language, and when I'm writing, I consider myself to be writing criticism of government officials. I'm going to tell them right up front that that's what I'm doing, and I'm going to present my side. But you know what? I'll also, which makes it credible, is I present the other side. I think it's incredibly important to present both sides of an argument, and then at least and be honest about the information you're giving, and then say, well, we looked at both sets of these facts, and this is our conclusion. I'll tell you, this is something I learned early on. Was one of the first editorials I wrote was they were trying to introduce a constitutional amendment. Gerald Solomon, congressman up north, was trying to introduce a constitutional amendment to ban burning of flags. And I wrote this just rabid editorial, just how freedom of expression and everybody should be able to do this, and I just went off, and it was I made my case that way. Well, the editor who read it, and this is where you learn from editors, is he said, well, what about veterans? They fight in wars, and they see that flag and they're inspired by it. And what do you say to them when you say it's perfectly fine for somebody to go burning a flag, and they're trampling on these people's service? What do you say to that? And you can't ignore that, because that's a real factor in why you're writing the piece. So I had to go back, and basically my conclusion was, it's horrible that somebody burns the flag, but those veterans aren't fighting for a cloth. They're fighting for the images that what it represents. And yes, you have every right to be absolutely angry. If you see somebody burning flag, go stomp it out. Do something. You're a right to be enraged, but this is one of the freedoms, as disgusting as it can be sometimes, that this country allows people to have. So when you're making an argument, look for the validity of the criticism, and look to make sure that they actually are weighing both, or looking at other facts. When I'm writing, I'll tell you, this is funny, I'll try not to keep it too long. I wrote an endorsement for, it was in the race between Congressman John Sweeney and Kirsten Gillibrand, who's now our U.S. Senator. She was just running for the congressional seat. And I wrote this editorial and couldn't stand Sweeney. But our publisher had us, we did our vote in our editorial board meeting, and we had to endorse Sweeney. So I wrote their qualifications in the editorial, in the endorsement editorial, right? And I'm down at my mother's house in Catskill, and I'm watching TV, and Sweeney runs a TV ad, and he quotes the Post-Star's endorsement editorial. And I said to my mother, I said, hey, I wrote that. And then Kirsten Gillibrand ran a TV ad quoting the same editorial. And I said, I wrote that too, in the same piece. They obviously found information that they could, that supported their case, and they were both able to use what I said. They obviously left out the other parts. But they don't have to be balanced, but you have to make sure that you're seeing both. And I think that's one sign. I know what you're saying, though. It's like, how do you know a story's not subjective? There's always a little subjectivity that creeps into a story because reporters are human and they're covering things from a perspective. And it's a really tough job to maybe take that out or to rein that in or to catch it if a reporter's doing it. If a reporter's very, anti-Trump and they're covering a Trump rally, you got to be really careful to watch how they approach that, and did they do it fairly, and did they step back and not allow their own personal prejudices to seep in, because it happens. We all kind of look at things through our own window, and the best reporters really trying to separate that out and just look at what's happening in front of their eyes and present a fair case. Again, it goes to the credibility of the source. Did that come close to even answering what you said?
No, and that's an excellent example when something you've written. That's when you wish that they were paying you $50 for each quote. They put, that's excellent.
Good. Yes?
Yeah, Mark, you spoke earlier about the importance of fact-checking in news stories. Could you talk a little bit about, under what circumstances is it okay for a news story to contain statements that have been made that are not factual without presenting that they're not factual?
I think you have to do that all the time. Every reporter has to be looking at that.
I see many stories where, it's just
That somebody just says something and just kind of there's this thing where you want to get balanced, you want to get the other side in, and so they'll say something about and then maybe it's not true, and then maybe the reporter's job is to either point that out or to present another source who's at least arguing with them. I mean, some of the stuff that they put in is people's opinions. A lot of it is people's opinions. It's a little bit harder to edit them out for factual content, but I think you would look at the story as a whole and see if they presented they presented that person said something that was totally wrong or totally false or just off base, whatever. And did they have some other information in there that countered it? And if they didn't, then they should have. You know what I mean? Reporting isn't, like I said, it's not perfect, and people, there's time constraints, and also reporters just sometimes don't do a good job. And they should have probably caught that and pointed it out or not included it at all.
Right. But many times I think you read a story and you're presented with a statement that someone's made.
Mm-hmm.
It's clearly, as you said, it's an opinion, and then there's another side, there's another opinion. But as a reader, you don't necessarily know that it's opinion. You don't have a good basis on which to say, well, where are the facts?
Like I said, if you're quoting a source that's critical, that's all right. But somebody makes statements of flat out. Maybe it's because of who it came from. This person said this, but you really should be fact checking your sources. And if it's hard, but if you've got the time and you really should make the time, that's when you're evaluating a story, like I said at the beginning. How credible are the sources and how good of a job did they do at presenting a fair case? If you see something that you think is false, then they didn't do a good job at the story. And I don't know if you call that fake news, but you call it sloppy reporting. And that's the organization's got to be better at it. Yes.
It's not always possible to check facts if someone's pointing out an issue that you have, that's not reported on elsewhere.
Right.
Such as in a magazine or something like that. How do you check a fact when that information isn't out there.
So like when the New York Times was quoting the Enquirer over something years ago, you know, check the credibility of the source that they're quoting. I'll quote newspapers and magazines. I quote, you know, other papers, even local ones, as long as I trust that that's a legitimate source. You know, Saratogian interviewed this person. He said, you know, had this information. If they're not hiding this, you know, the identity of the source or where they're getting from, that's a good way to check. If they're quoting a source that you can check on yourself, then you know, then that's a way to put a check on the reporting. Yes.
If a story is told from a biased perspective, is that considered fake news?
What do you mean told from a biased perspective?
Like, a few years back, Trump had, like, there was like a Trump rally and everybody got ice cream. And Trump got 2 scoops whilst everybody else got 1.
Mm-hmm.
And when the story was told, it was like, oh, this was so selfish. So that, I'd consider that like a biased story. But is it considered fake news if it's like, if it has a public opinion and it's, like if the writer has an opinion but they're not stating that it's an opinion?
I think you need to state that it's an opinion. If you don't, it may not be fake news because it may have been true. You know, did you get 2 scoops? Did everybody else get 1? If they put their spin on it, then you question how the other information in the story, it might make you question. And then what you want to do is maybe look at, you know, more than one news organization covered that rally. What did they write? You know, check multiple sources. That's a good thing. And it's easy to do online these days because there's so many, you know, so much information you can access. But if you read a story like that and you say, boy, that just strikes me as, you know, they're just picking on him, you know, for that. Let me see what the other, you know, if it was a significant, you know, something to point out, then somebody else will probably come up with it. If you don't see it in another source, then at least maybe question it. Either they got this great scoop, no pun intended, or other news organizations, legitimate news organizations, ignored it for a reason. So if you're really getting your news from one source, you're really doing yourself a disservice. And, you know, I'll even say, it's like, you know, if you want to, you know, even with my paper, I'd say read multiple papers, you know. If, you know, we're all covering the Schoharie fatal limousine crash right now. If you want, I look at the other papers to see what they've got and see if they got something more than us. To see, if I'm writing my editorial, it's like, you know, I'll see if that information jives with what our reporters. It's not like I'm not trusting our reporters, but I'd kind of like to have a second opinion. Like you go to the doctor and it's like, yeah, I trust you, doc, but I still want to ask somebody else. That rule applies to evaluating fake news as it does to evaluating your own health. Did I answer your question, or do you want me to answer it more? Okay. Let me just get this gentleman. Yeah.
Maybe a bit off topic.
Okay.
Talking about maybe we need a few years yet, but I'm starting to see maybe some detrimental effects from sort of this kind of tea-based forms of journalism that are practiced on certain websites, which are held to be legitimate when they shouldn't be. So that's, for example, I read a lot of interviews. I've always enjoyed interviews with artists, writers, with the insights. And I've always never had to, you know, start reading like halfway through, just put it down. I find myself doing that more and more. These are legitimate interviews that are spread. One recently in Vanity Fair, and they tend to be focused on personal attacks, or maybe too much on person, what they're wearing, mannerisms, things they're saying that should be off record, that's included, and I think down the road, maybe, I mean, I wouldn't put myself in that situation, so,
The interviewee, you mean? Like
Yeah.
the person being interviewed?
yeah, so we see less interviews, but they'd be less upfront as they were in the past.
Well, everybody's got to watch what they say, and you know, especially these days, that either going to be misquoted, it's going to be taken out of context, or they'll quote you. You know, I mean, some people don't like what they say, what they comes out of their mouth. You know, and they wish they could take it back. And a lot of times that happens too. Is like, well, fake news. I said that I had an abortion when I was 14 years old, and well, you said that, and it's like we have it on tape. We have it. You told us other. It's like you can't kind of hide from facts. But if you don't like the questioning, find another, source to where they're interviewing people. If you want less fluff, or if you want less celebrity, junk. If you really want to know this person or whatever than that, then you would probably want to find a magazine or somebody who interviews these people who does a different approach to it. Again, it's not necessarily fake news. It just might be, it doesn't appeal to you.
Do you think that will ever enter into the mainstream, or it could be sort of this sensationalization?
I think it's a challenge we face every day. I hear it. I don't get it. I'm sort of insulated from it, and I'm not quite sure why at my paper. But they talk about how many eyeballs on this story, how many hits did it get on Twitter or the other social media. There's competition for stuff that people are going to jump at. That's why, like, on all our, if you look at the most read items on our website, like, we list them. It's police stuff, crime. People want to, that's what they're, it's kind of sexy, it's short, it's sexy is a horrible term to use, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's fascinating to people. That's what they click on.
That's a good example. Actually, recently, I was looking through on Facebook. I had a source almost all of what I was reading, and they were arrests. I think it was all the police. And it's an emotion on, and then people are commenting that know the person, don't know the person, personal attacks.
It's awful. I try not to read the comments on, on stories and things, because people will just get nasty.
It's the responsibility of the I have less respect for law enforcement if they're going to be allowing that kind of discourse to happen on their website.
Yeah.
And they just post the information. Please know that. But if we need to see these really awful, mean-spirited, hateful comments, like some people have good problems, they're going through their lives, and they're failing. You see that?
Yeah. It's awful. I mean, we used to get.
What the responsibility on police department not to have that?
Sure, they could do that. I mean, a lot of newspapers did that. When we first got on the internet, was that 10 or 20? 10. Oh, geez. I didn't even get into the government. Whoa, which is my stuff. Great. If a lot of organizations turn off the comments. We used to get nasty comments about obituaries, so we stopped running the comments on obituaries. Like, God, you let the guy alone. He died, and his family's in mourning, and you guys are saying, well, he owes me money. It's like, don't do that. Don't say mean things, But yeah, the online comments, especially, people feel, even if they're not anonymous, people sign their names to nasty stuff. It's awful. My wife reads the comments on my editorials because I will just cry. So, no. But she'll, oh, geez, Mark, they're really hammering you. Yeah, I kind of figured. So, yeah, I mean, choose your sources. Choose the sources of information. Yes?
What are some mainstream news sources that you find to be credible and reliable?
We used the New York Times. Yeah, we used the New York Times and the Washington Post as our news sources. And those guys they're the best reporters in the world. Every single one of them is Tom Brady. And I'm a Jets fan. And yes, I did watch the game there. They're the best reporters in the world. You look at what, their credibility. We also get information from Bloomberg News and Tribune News Services, legitimate news services from bigger papers around the country. So that's what we presented in our news. This is an interesting question because the New York Times also has its own opinion page. And it doesn't, so people will associate the news service that they provide, the news stories that they provide, with the whole paper. So we run New York Times articles, or we run Washington Post articles, and people will say, well, and it's the New York Times, and they have a lot of liberal columns, that's for sure. And maybe their whole opinion section is liberal bent, and whatever, anti-conservative, whatever. But people will associate the newspaper's opinion section with their news articles. And for those of us local newspapers that rely on their news service, my opinion page is not the same as the New York Times' opinion page. I try and present a wider variety of opinions and everything like that, and it's just different. It's local and that. But so people will associate that, the newspaper itself with the syndicated news reports. But that's what you just look at the Wall Street Journal, which is more of a conservative, has more of a conservative bent on its opinion sections. Still valid sources. Some of the good state newspapers around here, the Buffalo News, Newsday, all really solid organizations. So when you're looking for state news or something going on in New York State government, the Buffalo News is always breaking news and breaking everything else. So they're good, reliable sources. I guess certain reporters on some of the TV network news, 60 Minutes has been trustworthy for 50 years, 100 years, however long they've been on the air. That's something you'd want to be watching and just seeing how they interview people and what they, if they're interviewing a source, it's legitimate. So yes.
So what do you think of NewsHour on the PBS? Is that good news? Judy?
I'm not much of a big TV news person. So I would have to evaluate that. I really don't watch too much of the.
I'm just wondering how, for instance, New York Times. How does New York Times choose its writers?
I assume by their skill level.
Level.
What they'll do is newspapers, it's kind of like there's a hierarchy. You start at the bottom at the smallest circulation, a weekly. You start at your college paper. You start at the local weekly, then you go boom, 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 and work your way up the ladder. So they're looking at a body of work as you're coming up through. And that's how I think they pick their reporters. That's how we pick ours. We look at the smaller papers and see if they did a good job in college or they did a good job at the paper at the next circulation level lower than us. And we'll say, okay, we look at the body of work. And if it's valid and thorough and that sort of thing. So that's how they pick their reporters, I'm guessing, because that's how we all pick our reporters. Yes?
So a news organization, whether it's a newspaper or whatever, they have to make a choice as to what stories go in there, and I'm sure there's lots of stories that don't make it, or
right.
where there was a decision made, no, we're not even going to look into this, right?
Right.
So what appears is not fake news. It may not, right? The language that they use may be completely fair, right? So everything's hunky-dory there, and yet just in the selection of
right.
what stories go in there versus
not just the
still
selection.
some kind of bias may get introduced, right? So
There's a certain amount of subjectivity, certainly there is, and what you have to trust is that the editors are presenting what they think is the most important news that affects maybe the most people, or like the other day we had a discussion, this comes up all the time, 2 minutes, okay. This discussion comes up all the time in daily newspapers, and the editor actually came in and he said, you guys want to, what should I put on the front page? A local, like a charitable, or the ministries, local ministries is having a big project. They're announcing a big project, and in Boston Spa, this woman is suing over vaping. Her injuries or her health problems associated with vaping. What should be on the front page? So he asked him. And he makes decisions all the time. This one sort of, made him think a little bit, wanted to get a second opinion kind of thing. And I evaluated based on, well, vaping is hot in the news right now. It's a lot of people are getting sick. Everybody's talking about it. The state has a ban that's pending. It's held up in the courts right now on certain vaping. If the lady has filed a legitimate lawsuit in court, she's just not making these accusations off the top of her head, but she actually went forward with the paperwork and has attorneys and put it into the court system. I think that's a valid story that a lot of people will be interested in. The church ministries, they just sort of have a plan on the table right now. They are not breaking ground on anything. They're fundraising. It's really good to announce. I said, I'd play this really big on the local section. I'd play the vaping thing on the front page because I think that would be more of interest in. It's kind of a hotter topic, and there might be more of this kind of thing coming down the pike. It's not a one-shot deal. So that was the decision making, and the editors make these decisions all the time. They sit in a meeting and they evaluate this whole plethora of national, local, state stories and decide which 5 go on the front, which 5 go on the local section, which go inside, and which don't go in the paper at all. It's a matter of space. It's a matter of when they break. It's a matter of, but it is a judgment call. Somebody's making a judgment somewhere, and as you read that paper for many years, you either trust that judgment or you don't. You might look at it and say they keep burying this story that's important to me. These guys they're biased against this or whatever. That's how you evaluate it. So, any other questions, real quick? Yes.
As a student here, I need to write a research paper from time to time. And my English teacher on the first day said that she will not accept a source that is Fox News.
That is what?
Fox News. She will not accept a source from Fox News since it's like too biased. So my question is, if a news source is biased, does it automatically make it uncredible?
Does it make it not credible?
Yeah.
I don't think all of Fox News is not credible. They have a solid news organization behind them. Again, this is where you blend the opinions. So whichever source you're quoting, I wouldn't punish that particular news organization in particular, but look at who you used as your source. Teacher can do whatever she wants in her classroom, obviously, or his classroom, but you want to make sure you get the most legitimate source, even if it's coming from an illegitimate news organization. That's what I would say. Standing close to the stage, didn't Lady Gaga fall off the stage the other day?
Yes.
So, anything else? I hope I gave you something to think about. We didn't talk about transparency. Maybe next year we'll come and have one on that. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time to support us. Thank you.